This is the story of the Cold War, a decades-long struggle between two superpowers that pushed the world to the edge of nuclear destruction. If you enjoy videos like this, consider subscribing. The world stood on the brink of destruction. At the height of the Cold War, a single decision, a misunderstood signal, or even one nervous commander could have triggered a nuclear war capable of wiping out millions in minutes. This was not a traditional war fought with tanks and soldiers on a battlefield. Instead, it was a global struggle of ideology, influence, and fear. A silent war between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. And for over 40 years, the fate of humanity hung in the balance. As the Second World War came to an end, much of Europe lay in ruins. But from the devastation, two nations emerged stronger than ever. The United States, wealthy, powerful, and armed with the atomic bomb. And the Soviet Union, victorious, battle-hardened, and determined to never again be invaded. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, having lost tens of millions of people during the war, sought security through control. Across Eastern Europe, communist governments were installed, creating a protective buffer zone. To the west, this expansion was alarming. Former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill would describe it with chilling clarity. An iron curtain had descended across the continent. Europe was no longer united, it was divided. Tensions quickly escalated. When the Soviet Union refused to withdraw troops from key regions and began pressuring neighboring countries, the United States responded decisively. In 1947, President Harry Truman introduced a bold new policy: containment. Its goal was simple: stop the spread of communism wherever it appeared. Through the Truman Doctrine, the U.S. sent aid to nations under threat, and with the Marshall Plan, billions of dollars were poured into rebuilding Europe. The logic was clear: a stable, prosperous Europe would be far less likely to fall to communism. But the divide only deepened. Nowhere was the division more visible than in Germany. Split into East and West, it became the front line of the Cold War. In 1948, Soviet forces blockaded West Berlin, cutting off all land access in an attempt to force the West out of the city. It was a direct challenge. The response? One of the most remarkable logistical operations in history. For nearly a year, American and British planes flew around the clock, delivering food, fuel, and supplies to the isolated city. This was the Berlin Airlift. At its peak, a plane landed every few minutes. Failure would have meant surrender. But success sent a powerful message: the West would not back down. The conflict soon spread far beyond Europe. In 1949, China fell to communism under Mao Zedong. In Korea, war erupted when the communist North invaded the South. The United States intervened, fearing the so-called domino effect, the belief that if one country fell, others would follow. The war was brutal. Millions died, and yet, after 3 years of fighting, the border remained almost exactly where it had begun. No victory, no resolution, but one crucial takeaway: communism could be contained. By the early 1960s, Cold War tensions reached a breaking point once again. East Germany was losing its people, millions fleeing to the West in search of freedom and opportunity. The solution? Seal the border. In 1961, construction began on what would become one of the most infamous symbols of division in modern history: the Berlin Wall. Concrete, barbed wire, guard towers. Families were separated overnight. A city split in two. It was more than a wall. It was a physical representation of a divided world. Then came the moment that brought humanity closest to annihilation. In 1962, American spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, just 90 miles from U.S. shores. The response was immediate. President John F. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade. No ships in, no missiles delivered. The world held its breath. For 13 days, the two superpowers stood on the edge of nuclear war. Behind the scenes, tension reached unimaginable levels. At one point, a Soviet submarine, cut off from communication and believing war had already begun, prepared to launch a nuclear torpedo. It required unanimous agreement from 3 officers. 2 said yes, 1 said no. That man prevented a nuclear strike that could have triggered global war. Finally, diplomacy prevailed. The Soviet Union agreed to remove its missiles. The United States pledged not to invade Cuba. The crisis ended, but the message was clear. The world had come terrifyingly close to destruction. The Cold War continued, now deeply entangled in Vietnam. The United States backed the South. The Communist North fought to unify the country. What followed was a long, costly, and deeply controversial war. As casualties mounted, public support collapsed. Television brought the war into people's homes. Protests erupted across the United States and beyond. For many, it felt unwinnable. In 1975, the U.S. withdrew. Vietnam fell to communism. Containment had failed. By the 1970s, both sides were exhausted. The constant threat of nuclear war had taken its toll. A period known as détente began, an easing of tensions. Agreements were signed to limit nuclear weapons. Communication improved. For a moment, it seemed the world might step back from the brink, but peace was fragile. In the 1980s, tensions rose again. U.S. President Ronald Reagan took a hard stance, increasing military spending and challenging the Soviet Union to keep up. But behind the scenes, the Soviet system was struggling. Its economy was failing. Its people were losing faith. Then came a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Unlike those before him, he embraced reform. He introduced openness, transparency, change. And most importantly, he sought peace. Through a series of historic meetings, the two sides agreed to reduce nuclear weapons. For the first time, both began to step back. But these reforms had unintended consequences. Across Eastern Europe, communist governments began to collapse, and in 1989, the unthinkable happened. The Berlin Wall fell, crowds gathered, families reunited, a symbol of division destroyed. Just 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union itself collapsed. The Cold War was over, not with a final battle, but with the quiet collapse of a superpower. For over 4 decades, the world had lived under the shadow of nuclear war. And while the conflict never erupted into direct combat between the two sides, its impact shaped nations, societies, and generations. Even today, its legacy remains. A reminder of how close the world once came, to the edge of destruction,